The Boots of Fortune, Chapter 1, The Queue of Ghosts, Myrtle Creek, Oregon, 2024. The grand opening of Madison's Market, my newest and largest superstore, was a triumph. The air hummed with excitement, balloons bobbed, and a long queue of eager customers snaked through the gleaming aisles. As I, Jessica Madison, the proud owner, stood near the entrance, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, a familiar ache began to throb behind my eyes. This town, Myrtle Creek, it held so many ghosts. I was 55 now, a testament to resilience, a self-made woman who had built an empire from nothing. My tailored suit felt like a second skin, comfortable and powerful. My smile, genuine and confident, was a far cry from the timid, often hidden grimace of my childhood. Then, my gaze drifted towards the checkout lanes, where the first wave of customers were already lining up. And there, in lane 3, just 2 people from the front, stood Tiffany Smith. My breath caught in my throat. Tiffany, her blonde hair, once so meticulously coiffed, was now a dull, faded straw. Her face, once plump with youthful arrogance, was now etched with a spiderweb of fine lines, pulled taut by some unseen strain. Her clothes, once designer and ostentatious, hung loosely, tired and worn. She clutched a nearly empty shopping cart, a few discount items rattling inside. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Tiffany Smith, the queen of cruelty, the architect of so much of my childhood misery, the girl who had made my very existence in this town a living hell. And then my eyes shifted. Standing directly behind her, hunched over a cart piled high with frozen dinners and a 6-pack of cheap beer, was Gary Peterson. Gary, Tiffany's loyal, sneering sidekick. His once bright, mischievous eyes were now dull and bloodshot, his face a roadmap of regret and hard living. They were here, in my store, standing in line at my cash register. The irony was a bitter, intoxicating cocktail. A specific memory, sharp and vivid, cut through the celebratory hum of the store. It was winter, sometime in the late 1970s. I was 10 years old. My family was poor, dirt poor. My clothes were hand-me-downs, patched and faded. My shoes were always too small, or too big, or falling apart. That winter, my mother, bless her heart, had tried to make sure I had warm feet. She'd given me her old, worn-out work boots. Big, clunky, practical, heavy-duty leather boots, scuffed and creased from years of her labor in the local cannery. They were 3 sizes too big, stuffed with newspaper, and they flopped around my ankles with every step. I remembered walking into the school cafeteria that day, the smell of institutional mystery meat filling the air. Tiffany Smith, always surrounded by her adoring, giggling minions, had seen me. Her eyes, bright with malicious glee, had fixed on my feet. "Look," she'd shrieked, pointing with a perfectly manicured finger. "Look at Jess's boots. She's wearing her mommy's boots. Are you gonna work in the cannery, Jess, just like your mommy?" The laughter had erupted, a brutal chorus that echoed in the cavernous cafeteria. Gary Peterson, always quick to join in, had stomped his feet, mimicking the clumsy clomp of my oversized boots, sending the other kids into fresh paroxysms of laughter. My face had burned scarlet. I'd wanted to disappear, to vanish into the cracked linoleum floor. The warmth of the boots, meant to protect, now felt like a branding iron of shame. I'd spent the rest of the day hiding in the library, tears silently blurring the words in my textbook. Those boots. They had been a symbol of my poverty, my humiliation, a brand, mark that distinguished me from the well-dressed popular kids like Tiffany. And now here they were, Tiffany and Gary, in my store, waiting to pay me. The universe, it seemed, had a darkly poetic sense of humor. The air in the store, once filled with jubilation, now felt thick with unspoken history, with the ghosts of past pains and the stark reality of present fates. My smile, which had been so genuine moments ago, now felt like a mask, hiding a torrent of complex emotions. The queue of customers stretched behind them, oblivious. But for me, it was a queue of ghosts, a living tableau of my past, brought sharply, undeniably, into my triumphant present. The boots, once a source of shame, were now a silent, powerful testament to a journey of survival and success. Chapter 2: The Weight of My Mother's Boots. My childhood in Myrtle Creek was defined by a pervasive, grinding poverty. Our small, drafty house, tucked away on the outskirts of town, always smelled of damp earth and the faint, sweet, sour scent of canned peaches from the cannery where my mother worked. My father had left when I was very young, a shadowy figure in my memory, leaving my mother to raise me alone with little more than her fierce love and an indomitable spirit. My mother, Sarah Madison, was a woman of quiet strength. Her hands, gnarled and calloused from years of repetitive labor on the canning line, were also the hands that meticulously patched my clothes, braided my hair, and cooked meager but nourishing meals. She worked double shifts, her body aching, her face etched with a permanent weariness. But she never complained, never. And she always put me first. The boots, those heavy brown leather work boots, they were her most prized possession, a necessity for her grueling job. They were sturdy, waterproof, built to withstand the cold, wet floors of the cannery. When winter came and my flimsy sneakers disintegrated, she insisted I wear her boots. "Your feet will be worn, Jess," she'd say, her voice gentle, as she stuffed newspaper into the cavernous toes. "That's what matters. Don't you worry what anyone says." But I did worry. Every single day. Those boots were a tangible, undeniable symbol of our poverty. The other kids, with their shiny new sneakers and fashionable snow boots, would giggle, point, and whisper. Tiffany Smith was always the loudest. Her family owned the town's only hardware store, and her father drove a gleaming new pickup truck. She wore brand new everything, her clothes crisp, her shoes spotless. Her contempt for my worn boots, for my patched clothes, for my very existence was palpable. "Still wearing your mommy's boots, Jess?" she'd taunt, her smile a cruel slash across her pretty face. "Don't you have your own?" The words cut deep, slicing through my fragile self-esteem. I hated those boots. I hated the shame they brought. I hated the way they clomped, announcing my arrival and my poverty to everyone. I hated the way Tiffany and Gary would mimic my clumsy walk, their laughter echoing in the school hallways. But I never complained to my mother. I knew the sacrifice she made. I knew those boots were her way of protecting me, of keeping me warm. So I wore them, day after day, week after week, through the long, wet Oregon winter, a silent badge of shame. Yet something else began to form within me during those lonely, humiliating days. A quiet, burning resolve, a fierce determination that went beyond just wanting new boots. I wouldn't just escape this poverty. I would thrive. I would build a life where I never had to feel this shame again. And I would ensure my mother, whose love was so immense, never had to work herself to exhaustion again. I buried myself in books. The school library became my sanctuary. Mr. Johnson, my elderly English teacher, noticed my quiet dedication. He saw past the ill-fitting clothes and the oversized boots. He saw a sharp mind, a tenacious spirit. He lent me extra books, encouraged my writing, and ignited in me a passion for business, for understanding how markets worked, how empires were built. He was the first person to truly see my potential, to whisper words of encouragement that countered the daily taunts. "Knowledge, Jessica," he'd say, tapping a dusty textbook. "That's your real wealth. They can't take that from you." His words became a mantra. I studied with a fervor that bordered on obsession. While Tiffany and Gary were at parties, flirting, and planning their next prank, I was poring over business journals, economics textbooks, anything I could get my hands on. I learned about supply and demand, about inventory management, about customer service. I dreamed of a different life, one where I wouldn't just survive, but flourish. I watched my mother toil, her face increasingly lined with fatigue, and the vision of her resting, of her hands finally still, became my driving force. The boots, once a symbol of my humiliation, began to transform into a symbol of my mother's sacrifice and my own quiet, relentless ambition. They were the weight of my past, but also the spring in my step, propelling me forward, away from Myrtle Creek, towards a future I was determined to build. A future where no one would ever laugh at me or my mother again. The very pain they inflicted was sowing the seeds of my future success, a bitter yet undeniably potent fertilizer. Chapter 3: The Ascent of Jess. After graduating high school as valedictorian, a feat that surprised no one who knew my work ethic, but utterly bewildered Tiffany and her ilk, I left Myrtle Creek. I won a full scholarship to a state university, a lifeline out of the poverty that had defined my youth. My mother, tearful but proud, waved goodbye, standing on our porch in her worn work boots. It was the last time I saw her in them. College was a revelation. I devoured every course, particularly those in business administration and logistics. I worked multiple part-time jobs to send money home to my mother, to ensure she could finally retire from the cannery. My goal was clear: to build something that would not only secure my future, but provide for her comfort in her old age. While my peers pursued internships at glamorous corporations, I sought out practical experience. I worked at a large retail chain, starting in inventory management, learning the intricacies of supply chains, customer flow, and operational efficiency from the ground up. I was a sponge, absorbing every detail, identifying inefficiencies, proposing solutions. My methodical approach and quiet insights quickly caught the attention of my superiors. My first major break came when I proposed a new inventory tracking system that saved the company millions. It was implemented and I was promoted, then promoted again. I moved up the corporate ladder with a speed that startled even me. I learned every facet of the retail business, from warehouse operations to marketing, from human resources to strategic planning. Meanwhile, back in Myrtle Creek, I heard snippets of news about Tiffany and Gary through infrequent phone calls with old acquaintances. Tiffany had married her high school sweetheart, a boy from another wealthy family. They'd moved to Portland, living the high life, throwing lavish parties. Gary, it seemed, had stayed in Myrtle Creek, working odd jobs, often found at the local bar. Their lives, it seemed, were following predictable trajectories, one of continued privilege, the other of quiet stagnation. I never forgot the boots. They were a constant, silent reminder of where I came from and why I worked so hard. They were the emotional bedrock of my ambition. Every deal closed, every new store opened, every financial success was not just a professional achievement, but a quiet, personal victory against the shame of those oversized, worn-out leather boots. After years of relentless work, I made a bold decision. I left my lucrative corporate job to start my own retail chain. My vision was simple yet revolutionary. Large, well-stocked stores offering quality goods at affordable prices with exceptional customer service. I called it Madison's Market, a subtle nod to my mother and to my humble origins. The initial years were brutal, filled with long hours, financial risks, and moments of doubt. But my drive, honed by years of overcoming adversity, was unyielding. My analytical mind, coupled with my deep understanding of the customer experience born from my own childhood needs, proved to be a winning combination. My first store was a success, then the second, then a dozen more. Soon, Madison's Market was a regional powerhouse, then a national one, a name synonymous with quality, value, and reliability. My mother, now comfortably retired, lived in a beautiful small house I bought for her, her days filled with gardening and reading, her hands finally at rest. She often visited my stores, beaming with pride, marveling at the abundance within their walls. She never mentioned the boots, but sometimes her gaze would linger on my perfectly tailored shoes, a quiet understanding passing between us. I had built an empire rooted in the fertile soil of childhood shame, watered by tears, and nurtured by relentless determination. I was Jessica Madison, the CEO, the entrepreneur, the woman who had conquered her past. And now, I was backing Myrtle Creek, the very place where it had all begun, opening my largest store yet, a tangible monument to my journey. Standing at the entrance, watching Tiffany and Gary in the checkout line, I felt the full weight of this moment. They represented the past, the pain, the humiliation, and I represented the future, the success, the quiet triumph. The circle was complete, in a way I could never have imagined. The ascent had been long and arduous, but the view from the top, looking down at the very people who had tried to hold me back, was undeniably clear. And in their faded faces, I saw not just their downfall, but the profound, almost spiritual irony of fate. Chapter 4: The Unseen Lives of Others. As I watched Tiffany and Gary in the checkout line, a wave of complex emotions washed over me. It wasn't simple triumph or vengeful satisfaction. It was something far more nuanced. Pity, perhaps. A strange sense of sadness for lives that had clearly not unfolded as they had once imagined. After the grand opening ceremony, I had discreetly asked one of my managers about Tiffany and Gary. My manager, a kind woman named Brenda, had grown up in Myrtle Creek too, and knew the local gossip. "Tiffany Smith?" Brenda had said, a sympathetic shake of her head. Oh, bless her heart. Her husband, Mark, lost everything in that big real estate bust a few years back. He left her high and dry. She lost the big house, the fancy cars. Now she's just scraping by. Works part-time at the old diner down the street, if she can get the shifts. Doesn't look too good, does she? And Gary Peterson? Gary, Brenda sighed. He never left town. Got into some trouble in his youth, always drinking too much. He's on disability now, I hear. Never married, just drifting. The news landed heavily. Their lives, once so full of promise, Tiffany, were simply indifferent stagnation. Gary had withered. The vibrant, sneering faces of my childhood tormentors were now etched with the ravages of hard living and dashed dreams. Tiffany, the girl who had owned everything, now barely owned herself. Gary, the boisterous follower, was a broken echo of his younger self. I remembered Tiffany's effortless beauty, her expensive clothes, her air of untouchable superiority. She had been the embodiment of privilege, her laughter echoing with a casual cruelty that came from never having to struggle. She had never known the gnawing anxiety of an empty refrigerator, the shame of worn-out shoes, the cold dread of winter without proper warmth. She had never had to wear her mother's hand-me-down boots, stuffed with newspaper. And Gary, he was always just following Tiffany's lead, laughing loudest, mimicking my clumsy gait. He was a product of his environment, perhaps, but his participation had still cut deep. Now their roles were utterly reversed. I, the Bucky Emily with the beaver teeth, the girl in her mother's oversized boots, was the one with the thriving business, the comfortable life, the power. And they, the once privileged and the once carelessly cruel, were standing in line, waiting to pay me for the necessities they needed. The contrast was stark. It could have been a moment of pure, unadulterated vindication, the kind of moment reserved for Hollywood movies, where the underdog finally gets their revenge. But as I watched them, huddled over their carts, their faces drawn and tired, a different emotion began to stir within me. It wasn't the triumphant roar of vengeance, but a quiet, almost melancholic understanding. Their lives were not just about their past cruelty to me. They were complex tapestries of their own struggles, their own failures, their own dashed hopes. Tiffany, who had built her identity on external validation and material wealth, had lost it all. Gary, who had never found his footing, was simply drifting through life. The thought of approaching them, of making myself known, felt like a loaded gun. Would I choose to inflict a final, crushing blow of humiliation, to remind them of their past cruelty, of my present triumph, to savor their discomfort, their shame? The temptation for a fleeting moment was immense. The years of bottled-up pain, of silent endurance, screamed for release, for payback. But then I thought of my mother, her gentle hands, her unwavering love, her quiet strength in the face of impossible odds. The boots, they weren't just a symbol of my shame. They were a symbol of her sacrifice, of my resilience, of the lessons she instilled in me. Honesty, hard work, and kindness, even when it was difficult. She had always told me, "Jess, don't let anyone else's meanness define you. You define yourself." Her words echoed in my mind, a quiet counterpoint to the vengeful whispers. To humiliate them now would be to stoop to their level, to become the very thing I had resented, someone who inflicted pain for personal gratification. My success wasn't about them. It was about me. It was about proving something to myself and to my mother. The line moved slowly. Tiffany and Gary were almost at the front. The moment was coming. The moment where I, Jessica Madison, would have to decide what kind of person I truly was. Would I be the girl who carried the bitterness of her past, or the woman who had transcended it? The unseen lives of others and their stark realities were now forcing me to look deep within myself, challenging the very core of my hard-won success. The choice was not just about them. It was about defining my own legacy. Chapter 5, The Crossroads of Fate. My heart hammered against my ribs as Tiffany and Gary shuffled closer to the front of the line. This wasn't just a retail transaction. It was a reckoning. I straightened my shoulders, took a deep breath, and began to walk towards lane 3. My steps were deliberate, measured. I kept my expression neutral, betraying none of the internal turmoil churning within me. As I approached, I saw Tiffany digging in her purse, her movements slow and fumbling. Gary stood behind her, his gaze fixed on the endless rows of merchandise, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Neither of them had looked up, still unaware of my presence. I stopped a few feet from the register. The cashier, a bright young woman named Sarah, how ironic, another Sarah, was scanning Tiffany's meager items. "That'll be $12.47, ma'am," the cashier said cheerfully. Tiffany pulled out a handful of crumpled bills, counting them slowly. Her fingers trembled slightly. She laid them on the counter. I think that's right," she murmured, her voice thin. I had to put back the coffee creamer. My eyes caught hers then. Her head lifted and her gaze, unfocused at first, suddenly sharpened. Her eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief, then dawning recognition, washing over her face. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving them ashen. "Jess," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Jessica Madison?" Gary, hearing her voice, looked up. His eyes, already dull, registered a similar shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. The air around the checkout counter crackled with tension. The cashier looked between us, confused. The few customers behind Gary shuffled impatiently. I maintained my composure, my gaze steady, unwavering. "Hello, Tiffany, Gary. It's been a long time." My voice was calm, devoid of any obvious emotion. Tiffany recoiled slightly, her hand instinctively going to her mouth, as if to hide the years of weariness etched on her face. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, for a hole to swallow her. The humiliation was palpable, a bitter ghost from our shared past. Gary, too, seemed to shrink. He shifted his weight, his eyes now fixed on his worn sneakers, anything to avoid my gaze. I didn't know you were back in town," Tiffany stammered, her voice shaking. This is your store?" "It is," I confirmed, my voice carrying a quiet authority. "Madison's Market." The cashier, sensing the profound discomfort, looked to me for guidance. "Ms. Madison, is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, Sarah," I replied, my gaze still fixed on Tiffany. "Just an old acquaintance." The silence stretched, thick with unspoken history. The past, with its bitter laughter and clumsy boots, stood face to face with the present, with its gleaming aisles and stark reversals of fortune. This was it, the moment I had dreamed of in some hidden corner of my heart. For decades, the opportunity to unleash the full force of my hard-won triumph. But as I looked at Tiffany, truly looked at her, her faded eyes, her trembling hands, the desperate vulnerability clinging to her like a shroud, the desire for revenge, for that sweet, bitter satisfaction began to dissipate. What would it achieve? More pain? More shame? It would not heal my past. It would only perpetuate a cycle of bitterness. I remembered my mother's worn boots, the symbol of my shame, yes, but also of her endless love and sacrifice. My success was built on her strength, not on Tiffany's cruelty. To use my power to humble her further would be a betrayal of that legacy. My triumph was in my ascent, not in their fall. I took a deep breath, making a decision that felt both impossibly hard and profoundly right. "Tiffany," I said, my voice softer now, gentler. "It seems life has brought us full circle, doesn't it?" My gaze swept over Gary, then back to her. "This store, it's built on a lot of hard work, A lot of lessons learned. Sometimes the hardest lessons turn out to be the most valuable. Her eyes met mine, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps surprise, perhaps a sliver of understanding. The tension, though still present, began to shift, transmuted by the unexpected calm in my voice. The crossroads of fate had arrived, and I had chosen a path that diverged from bitterness, leading instead towards an uncharted territory of compassion and a deeper, more profound form of victory. Chapter 6, The Unraveling. The moment of recognition hung heavy in the air. Tiffany, frozen with a mixture of shock and profound humiliation, stared at me. Gary, behind her, looked as though he wished the floor would swallow him whole. Jessica, I don't know what to say, Tiffany stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes, once so full of a cruel glee, now held a deep, naked shame. There's nothing to say, Tiffany, I replied. My voice calm, maintaining a polite professional distance, yet imbued with a quiet authority that belied the torrent of emotions within me. Life has a way of coming full circle, doesn't it? Before either of them could respond, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance of the store. A loud yell, then the distinct sound of a security alarm blaring. My manager, Brenda, rushed past, her face worried. "Ms. Madison," she called out, "we have a shoplifter in aisle 7, near the electronics." My focus immediately shifted. My store, my responsibility. "I'll be right there," I told Brenda, turning briefly from the checkout. As I moved, a small, subtle movement caught my eye. Gary, still in the checkout line, had quickly, furtively slipped a small, shiny package, a box of expensive razor blades, I noticed, from his cart into his jacket pocket. My gaze met his, briefly. His eyes widened in panic, then darted away. He thought he was unseen. But I, the CEO who had built her empire on meticulous observation, had seen everything. My mind raced. Shoplifting, in my store, and it was Gary Peterson, one of the very people who had tormented me. The universe, it seemed, was determined to test my resolve, to offer me yet another opportunity for a vengeful triumph. I made a snap decision. "Brenda," I called out, stopping her, "let our security team handle the situation in aisle 7. I'll take care of this lane." I nodded towards Tiffany and Gary. Brenda looked at me, surprised, but nodded and rushed off. I returned to the checkout, my gaze now direct, unwavering, on Gary. He was pale, sweating. "Sarah," I said to the cashier, "please finish scanning Tiffany's items and Gary's." My voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Tiffany, oblivious to Gary's quick maneuver, finished paying for her few items. She gathered her bag, still avoiding my eye. "Thank you, Emily," she mumbled, confusing my name, a nervous habit from her youth. "I mean Jessica." She hurried away, desperate to escape. Now it was just Gary. His cart was full. He had obviously not put back the razor blades. The cashier scanned his items. The total came up. "That'll be $87.92, Sarah said. Gary fumbled in his wallet. He pulled out a few crumpled bills, then hesitated. I don't think I have enough," he mumbled, his voice tight. "I'll have to put some things back." His eyes darted to my face, then to the cashier. He was clearly desperate, and the razor blades still bulged in his pocket. I knew this was the moment, the final, ultimate test. I could expose him. I could call security. I could have him arrested, humiliated, his already miserable life made even worse. The irony would be complete. The boy who mimicked my clumsy walk, the man who now tried to steal from me, but the image of my mother, tired but resolute, stuffing newspaper into my oversized boots, flashed in my mind. Her lessons, her strength, her unwavering kindness. What would she do? She would not humiliate. She would not crush. She would seek understanding. I took a deep breath. "Gary," I said, my voice low but clear enough for him to hear, "you can keep the razor blades." My eyes met his, a silent acknowledgement of what I had seen. He flinched, his face paling even further. "And," I continued, my gaze sweeping over his meager cart, "it looks like you could use a break today. It's on the house. Consider it a welcome back to Myrtle Creek gift." The cashier gasped softly. Gary stared at me, his mouth agape. Disbelief, then a profound, agonizing shame washed over his face. He knew I knew. He knew I had seen his attempt at theft and chosen not to expose him. He knew I was offering him not just groceries, but a lifeline, a gesture of unexpected grace. "No, Jess," he mumbled, shaking his head, his voice choked with emotion. I can't. I don't deserve it." "Everyone deserves a clean start, Gary," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Just pay it forward when you can. And welcome to Madison's market." I nodded to the cashier. "Process it as a store credit, please, Sarah." Gary stood there, tears welling in his eyes. He didn't say anything more. He just nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his grimy cheek. He gathered his bag, the razor blades still in his pocket, and walked out of the store, a broken man carrying an unexpected burden of kindness. The unraveling was complete. Not an unraveling of their lives, but an unraveling of my own bitterness. The pain of the past, the humiliation of those boots, had not led to vengeance, but to an act of profound, quiet compassion. The cycle of cruelty had been broken, not by force, but by grace, ushering in a new chapter, not just for them, but for me. My greatest victory was not in crushing my tormentors, but in lifting myself and others beyond the shadows of the past. Chapter 7, The Weight of Forgiveness. The encounter with Gary and Tiffany left me with a strange, profound sense of peace. The bitter satisfaction I might have expected from their reduced circumstances was replaced by a quiet realization. Their suffering brought me no joy. My true victory lay not in their downfall, but in my own ascent and in my capacity for compassion. News travels fast in a small town like Myrtle Creek. Word of my unexpected generosity towards Gary and my quiet, dignified confrontation with Tiffany quickly spread. The manager, Brenda, later confided that Gary had returned to the store the next day, not to shop, but to speak with her. He was still visibly shaken, deeply ashamed. He offered to work to pay off the debt. Brenda, knowing my implicit wishes, hired him for a part-time stock clerk position, a fresh start. Tiffany, too, heard the whispers. She avoided the store for weeks, but eventually, driven by necessity and perhaps a flicker of curiosity, she returned. I saw her from my office, pushing a cart, her head held a little higher. She didn't approach me, nor did I approach her, but a silent, mutual understanding passed between us. The battlefield of our youth was finally disarmed. The boots, they were no longer a symbol of shame, or even just of my mother's sacrifice. They had become a symbol of my journey. The weight of them, once a burden, was now a grounding force, a constant reminder of where I came from and how far I had traveled. They taught me about endurance, about resilience, about the hidden strength that can be found in adversity. My mother, now in her late 70s, would often visit. She loved to walk the aisles of Madison's market, marveling at its abundance. One day, as we stood near the shoe section, She paused, her gaze resting on a display of sturdy, comfortable work boots. "You know, Jess," she said softly, "these remind me of my old boots, the ones you used to wear." I looked at her, her eyes twinkling with shared memory. "They kept my feet warm, Mama," I said, a faint smile on my lips. She patted my hand. "That's what matters, always." We didn't need to say more. The unspoken understanding between us was profound. She knew the pain those boots had caused me, and she knew the strength they had forged. She knew the girl who wore them had now built this empire, not out of bitterness, but out of a deep-seated desire to protect, to provide, and to uplift. My journey was a testament to the fact that success isn't just about accumulating wealth or power. It's about how you wield it. It's about transforming pain into purpose and using your strength to build bridges, not burn them. The weight of forgiveness was not a burden, it was a liberation. It freed me from the chains of resentment, allowing me to fully embrace the present and to look towards the future with an open heart. Myrtle Creek, once a place of deep hurt, had become a place of healing. Madison's market, once just a business venture, had become a symbol of redemption, and those old, clunky, oversized boots, once a source of bitter tears, now stood as a quiet monument to resilience, to the enduring power of a mother's love, and to the profound, transformative grace of forgiveness. The weight of forgiveness wasn't just about absolving others. It was about truly, deeply, and beautifully absolving myself. Chapter 8. The Ripple Effect. The small town of Myrtle Creek, accustomed to its predictable rhythms and long-held grudges, began to feel the subtle ripple effect of Jess Madison's return and her unexpected acts of grace. Gary Peterson, once a fixture at the local bar, became a regular, reliable employee at Madison's market. He was still quiet, still carried the weariness of his past, but a new dignity settled upon him. He rarely spoke of the incident, but his quiet gratitude was palpable in his diligent work. Tiffany Smith, still working at the diner, began to frequent Madison's market more openly. Her interactions with staff were polite, almost humble. She never spoke directly to Jess about their past, nor did Jess initiate it. But sometimes their eyes would meet across the bustling aisles, and a flicker of acknowledgement, not shame, but a shared history would pass between them. It was a silent understanding, a quiet truce. Jess, though a national figure in retail, maintained a strong presence in Myrtle Creek. Her store became a hub, not just for commerce, but for community. She sponsored local events, provided scholarships for promising students, and quietly supported struggling families. She ensured that the store provided fair wages, good benefits, and a workplace culture of respect and opportunity, especially for those in need of a second chance. It was a stark contrast to the cutthroat business practices she had witnessed in her early career, and a direct reflection of her own journey. She often thought of Mr. Johnson, her old English teacher, who had seen her potential when no one else did. His words about knowledge being true wealth had resonated throughout her life. She established a literacy program in his name, providing books and tutoring for children in Myrtle Creek, ensuring they had the tools to build their own futures, just as he had given her. The saga of the boots became a powerful, whispered legend in Jess's family. Her nieces and nephews, growing up in a world of privilege far removed from her childhood, would listen, wide-eyed, to the story of Aunt Jess and the oversized boots. It was a lesson in humility, in resilience, and in the profound power of empathy. They understood that their family's comfort was built on the foundation of struggle and the enduring strength of a woman who never forgot where she came from. Jess often walked through the store, observing, just as she had observed in her youth. She saw the new generation of teenagers, some confident and carefree, some shy and self-conscious. She saw mothers, tired but loving, trying to provide for their families. She saw the full spectrum of human experience, mirrored in the faces of her customers, and in each face she saw a piece of her own past, a reflection of the journey she had taken. The boots. They were no longer physical objects, but a profound metaphor. They represented the uncomfortable truths of poverty, the sting of judgment, but also the incredible fortitude of the human spirit. They symbolized the journey from shame to strength, from pain to purpose. They had carried her through hardship, and now they symbolized the foundation upon which she built an empire of compassion. The ripple effect of Jess's choices extended beyond individuals. It fostered a subtle shift in the community of Myrtle Creek. There was a renewed sense of possibility, a quiet pride in their own. The town had seen its struggles, its economic downturns, but Jess Madison, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks, had returned not with bitterness, but with a vision of growth and opportunity for all. Her story, the story of the boots, was a testament to the enduring power of grace, to the quiet strength of forgiveness, and to the profound truth that the most impactful legacies are often built not on what you take, but on what you give, echoing far beyond the confines of a small town, inspiring countless unseen acts of kindness in its wake. Chapter 9, The Tapestry of Time. Time wove its intricate threads through the lives of Jessica Madison, Tiffany Smith, and Gary Peterson, creating a tapestry rich with the hues of change and reconciliation. Jess, now in her 70s, had gracefully stepped back from the daily operations of Madison's market, entrusting her vast enterprise to a new generation of leaders who upheld her values of compassion and community. She spent her days tending a beautiful, sprawling garden at her Myrtle Creek home, a vibrant contrast to the barren landscape of her childhood. It was a place of peace where she often sat, reflecting on the long, winding road that had brought her here. Gary Peterson remained a loyal employee at Madison's market until his retirement. He was a quiet man, but his commitment to his work and his subtle, respectful demeanor spoke volumes. He often gave a curt nod to Jess when he saw her in the store, a silent acknowledgement of the hand she had extended. He had found stability and purpose, a quiet dignity he hadn't known in his youth. Tiffany Smith, too, found a semblance of peace in her later years. She continued working at the diner, her life less tumultuous, more grounded. She occasionally saw Jess in town, sometimes sharing a brief, polite exchange. The sharp edges of their past had softened into a dull ache, a distant memory rather than a raw wound. There was no grand reconciliation, no tearful embrace, but a quiet, mutual acceptance had settled between them. The old animosity had simply, gracefully, withered away. Jess often thought of her mother, who had passed away peacefully a few years prior, secure and beloved in her old age. The memory of her mother's boots, once a source of shame, now brought a warmth to Jess's heart. They symbolized not just poverty, but fierce love, sacrifice, and the enduring spirit that had been passed down to her. They were the foundation, the very soil from which her empire had grown. She considered the meaning of winning. For a long time, in the hidden corners of her heart, winning had meant proving them wrong, surpassing Tiffany, showing Gary. But now, she understood it was so much more. Winning was about breaking the cycle of hurt. Winning was about building something meaningful. Winning was about finding peace within herself, regardless of what others thought or did. Her success was not about revenge, it was about resilience. Her compassion was not weakness, it was her greatest strength. The image of Tiffany and Gary in her checkout line, once a source of bitter irony, had transformed into a profound lesson in the human condition, in the unpredictable turns of fate, and in the enduring power of grace. The story of the boots of fortune became a whispered legend in Myrtle Creek, a tale passed down through generations. It was a narrative of humble beginnings, of enduring hardship, of a seemingly insignificant object becoming a powerful symbol of destiny. It spoke of a young girl's pain, a mother's sacrifice, and a woman's extraordinary journey to transcend her past, not by erasing it, but by transforming it into a legacy of kindness and opportunity. The tapestry of time had not only healed old wounds, but had woven new threads of connection, understanding, and profound peace, leaving an indelible mark on a small town and the lives it contained. Chapter 10: The Horizon of Grace. In the quiet twilight of her life, Jessica Madison sat on the porch of her Myrtle Creek home, watching the sun dip below the Oregon hills. The air was cool, scented with pine and damp earth, familiar comforts that had replaced the chilling dread of her impoverished childhood. Her hands, no longer calloused from labor but softened by time, rested gently in her lap. She thought of the journey. The little girl in oversized, clunky boots, stuffing them with newspaper, her face burning with shame. The relentless taunts of Tiffany Smith and Gary Peterson, their laughter echoing in her ears. The quiet, indomitable spirit of her mother, whose love had been her true shield. The grueling years of work, the relentless pursuit of knowledge, the steady, deliberate climb to the pinnacle of her industry. And then, that day, the grand opening, the sight of Tiffany and Gary in her checkout line, broken by life, mirroring the very vulnerability they had once exploited in her. The crossroads of decision, vengeance or grace. She had chosen grace, and in that choice, she had found a deeper, more profound victory than any material success could offer. She had not only built an empire, she had built a legacy of compassion, a testament to the enduring power of empathy over bitterness. Gary had retired last year, a quiet, transformed man. He had found dignity and stability through the work she had given him. Tiffany, too, had found a measure of peace, her life simpler, more honest, no longer defined by the superficialities of the past. Their paths, once intertwined by cruelty, had found a new, quiet coexistence marked by unspoken understanding. The boots of fortune, they were no longer just a memory. They were a symbol of every step she had taken, every challenge she had overcome. They represented the resilience born from adversity, the strength forged in pain, and the ultimate truth that true power lies not in asserting dominance, but in extending kindness. Her legacy was not only in the thousands of jobs she created, the communities she supported, or the vast wealth she had accumulated. It was in the quiet dignity she brought to every interaction, the second chances she offered, and the unwavering belief that everyone, no matter their past, deserved a chance to stand tall. Jess closed her eyes, a faint smile playing on her lips. She had built her life, stone by stone, from the rubble of her past. She had turned the bitter laughter into the gentle hum of her thriving markets. She had transformed shame into purpose, and she had done it all, not with a clenched fist, but with an open hand, guiding others, just as her mother's love had guided her. the sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in hues of orange and purple. A new day would dawn, bringing with it new challenges, new opportunities. But for Jessica Madison, the horizon was already clear. It was a horizon of grace, stretching endlessly before her. A testament to a life lived, not in reaction to pain, but in active pursuit of profound, enduring compassion. Her story, a quiet epic of the human spirit, would continue to echo through time, a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest triumph lies in the simple, beautiful act of letting go of the past and embracing a future built on forgiveness and unwavering kindness. The boots, once a burden, now whispered tales of unparalleled triumph and boundless, enduring grace.